Okay, listen. We have a lot of stuff to break down. Sukuna can interact with souls, seemingly. And my theory of Gojo being able to see, interact, and now even attack souls might have all just been proven correct from this one chapter alone. So, without further ado, let's just get into the video. But, real quick, I just want to ask you all to make sure you subscribe to the channel because we are actually coming up on 14,000 subscribers. And I think that would be pretty fucking cool if we hit it from this video. So, make sure to subscribe if you haven't already for the massive PP energy. But without further ado, let's just get into the video. This chapter opens up with Gojo standing face to face with the Mahoraga and Mei going on to explain how it is the crown jewel of the Zenin clan, which is interesting to me purely based on the fan theory that a lot of people think that this isn't actually the final Shikigami yet, and instead it might actually be the Gashado Dokuro. I hope I didn't just butcher that name, but that's the prevalent fan theory, that is actually the final Shikigami here. But Mei thinks that the crown jewel is the Mahoraga and not this final other Shikigami, even if it does exist. But we get this other interesting talking point here, and it's when Choso tells Yuji that this Shikigami has the ability to adapt to any attack. Now, this is a completely different sentence from being able to adapt to any and all phenomena, like what Sukuna said originally in the Shibuya instance. And this statement alone here does bring down the stocks of Mahoraga considerably if it is true, and it is the case here, because being able to adapt to an attack is a totally different thing from being adapting to any and all phenomena here. We'll, hopefully get to figure that out at some point soon later down the line. But we cut over to Sukuna staring Gojo down with the Mahoraga behind him, looking as if he's a fucking JoJo character with this stand right now. But these next couple of panels is where we get a lot of information here, which originally when I saw the leaks, I was genuinely concerned of this coming across as a bit of an arse pull kind of thing. However, these translations clear up a lot of my concerns, which I'm genuinely happy for, because I didn't have to want to get on here and bitch about the chapter. But the chapter gives us a lot of stuff. So I do want to say though, not all of it has been cleared up, but it does break down a lot. So let's just get into it and break it all down here. The narrator kicks in here and says Gojo Satoru is well aware of the Mahoraga's abilities, and in his battle with Yorozu, Sukuna used the Mahoraga's adaptation ability for himself in order to see through her construction technique. Now, this little panel here, I think, is referring to this panel here. In this panel, we see Sukuna was engulfed in the liquid metal, but we see his eye almost glowing, and I think that that's what this is referring to, with Sukuna being able to see through the liquid metal here. But then the narrator goes on to say how the domain expansion sure hit effects cancelled each other out a total of 5 times. Gojo's sure hit effect targets everything within the domain, and Sukuna's sure hit effect targets everything within the domain except himself, which meant that the sure hit effect targeting Sukuna was still in place. This is very interesting, because this statement of Gojo's sure hit targeting everything is very interesting, and that's a very critical part in this video right here, very critical to my theory as well. But we'll circle back around to this in a quick second. But the narrator goes on and carries on to say how Sukuna continues to take on Unlimited Void 5 times, all while shouldering the burden of Mahoraga's adaptation ability. However, the one who was actually bearing this burden was, and this is where we then switch back to Gojo thinking about what just happened, with Gojo saying how the Mahoraga just adapted within 0.01 seconds, and then even going on to say how not only did the wheel not turn, but he summoned the Mahoraga after he took my attack, with Gojo trying to figure out what just happened and saying, did Sukuna just take on the burden of the Mahoraga's adaptation? And then he goes on to stop himself and says, no. Now, this is where my theory starts to get a lot more evidence, which, if you didn't know, for the longest time, I theorized that Gojo and Sukuna can interact with souls, and with Sukuna being able to perceive and attack them, and Gojo also being able to perceive, interact, and attack them. And now these next couple of panels add a lot of credibility to this theory, and I would even go as far as to say most likely confirm this as well. We see this panel of what Gojo's vision looks like, and he sees things differently. Obviously, we already know this, but when he looks at Sukuna, he sees 2 bright spots, and now I think that these are the souls inhabiting Sukuna, the bigger one being the more dominant soul, and the smaller one being Megumi's suppressed soul. This narrator kicks in here to say how the one taking the damage to use the adaptation was actually Megumi's soul, and now this is where we're going to circle back around to the point of when the narrator said that Gojo's domain targets everything within the domain barrier. If Gojo's sure hit targets everything within the domain, that would include souls, which based off what we know so far from within the series, from when Kenjaku said the soul is the body and the body is the soul, if someone's body is within the domain of Gojo, then their soul is also susceptible to damage, which I have long theorized within the series that Gojo has been able to do. However, I've never had anything properly concrete. It has all just been theory until this chapter, which basically confirms it. And even though I theorized it, I've also been able to say that this might actually be the secret technique of Sukuna. And again, I've made another video of this and how he was able to switch bodies from Yuji to Megami by manipulating his soul and controlling his soul to switch bodies. However, what I'm not entirely sure on is just how Sukuna was able to switch the targets from himself to Megami's soul. That's the part I'm very, very unsure of here. But what I would say is I would likely draw it's a similar conclusion on how Gojo drew out Geto's soul from Kenjaku's body in a similar way to this. Maybe Sukuna forced Megami's soul to swap just long enough to take the brunt of the damage and the adaptation, but he still kept control. However, I'm not really sure on this right now. We need some more evidence because, again, this is like the kind of first time we've seen something like this happen within the series, but it does give a lot of credibility to my previous theories of Gojo and Sukuna being able to interact with, perceive, and attack souls. But one thing I do want to clear up is that a lot of people liken this situation to when Yuji was trapped in Mahito's domain, and Yuji was unaffected because Sukuna basically defended him from the attack. And yes, I do see the similarities on a base level, however, it's not quite the same thing. Mahito's domain was meant for him to touch the soul. That was his domain's effect. It would touch the soul. And he accidentally touched Sukuna's soul while trapping Yuji. But here, Sukuna has switched the targets out of his own volition. Mahito's was unintentionally touching both souls at the same time, causing Sukuna to defend Yuji, whereas Sukuna has intentionally switched out a suppressed soul for himself to take the damage and the adaptation, which is what we're not sure on how he's done it. But again, you know me, I'm a slut for these soul theories, and this opens up a lot of soul theories, and like, you know, I will be dropping more videos on this real soon because I really want to dive into this because it's one of my favorite subjects within Jujutsu Kaisen. But Sukuna goes on to dispel the Mahoraga, and I can't lie, the way that this panel was set up, it made it look as if the Mahoraga spoke and said what's up, but that was really confusing. But we do get to see some trash talk between Sukuna and Gojo here within Sukuna asking him what's up, and Gojo replying to him is saying, "It just warms my heart to see you fighting so desperately," with Sukuna laughing and saying, "Look who's talking." And I can't lie, this flirty trash talk banter between these two, and especially what's said at the end of the chapter, makes Broken Ronin's video all that more valid. So if you haven't already, go check that video out because it's a very funny video to watch, and it's got a lot of truth behind it, and I'm a personal subscriber to that video as well. But Sukuna then goes on to talk about Gojo's unlimited void, saying how it's the ability that activates once he's inside the domain, and Sukuna knew it would be a real pain. Then going on to explain how why his first move was to take that card out of the deck, which does give credibility to Sukuna planning for it, which again, I'm not really shocked by. It's Sukuna, his battle IQ's through the fucking roof. I would be shocked if he didn't go into this with some sort of plan. But Sukuna goes on to explain how while he was unable to use domain amplification within the domain, he had Megami adapt to unlimited void using his 10 shadows technique, and then saying as a result he couldn't use any other chaos technique other than what was imbued in his domain. Now this piece is also very interesting because the other day in my Discord I theorized that what Yuta said about chaos technique being like car engines could give some insight to this, because I've long theorized now that Sukuna, or just anyone in general in the series, can't use two chaos techniques simultaneously. I used what Yuta said as an example, so let's say Sukuna is using cleave and dismantle, which is one engine, but the first one overheats. He can then use the second engine, which is the 10 shadows, until the engine of number 1 cools down and then repeats the process. To give even more credibility to this, we saw Kenjaku do something very similar in his fight with Yuki, where he'd use his gravity technique once and then he would switch out to Chaos Spirit manipulation until his gravity technique came back. However, he never used them both at the same time. Like, he couldn't use gravity and summon a Chaos Spirit at the same time. It would either be a Chaos Spirit out and then gravity, or gravity and no Chaos Spirit and vice versa. But Sukuna basically confirms that you cannot use two Chaos techniques at the same time here. Gojo then goes on to dispute what Sukuna said about Megami adapting, saying that all Megami took was a process of adaptation and not the resulting adaptation. And now you may be confused here, and I think I have a theory for this one. I think Mahoraga's wheel can be applied to anything with a soul, maybe even other Shikigami within the 10 Shadows. However, only the Mahoraga itself can fully adapt to a thing, an attack, or a phenomena, whatever one you say, while the others can only borrow it or adapt to the process of the attack, whereas Mahoraga can do it fully. I hope that makes sense. It's kind of confusing, but that's the working theory that I have here for how that does it, because again, this kind of stuff isn't really fully explained. But Gojo goes on to sort of confirm this by saying, Sukuna, if you haven't actually adapted Megami Soul itself to Unlimited Void, and if I open my domain again, Mahoraga will not be able to save you, won't be able to bail you out, then going on to say he'll destroy it in one hit, which Gojo has said twice now, and I've also theorized multiple times that I think Gojo gets rid of Mahoraga in a timely fashion, similar to the way Sukuna did it in Shibuya. And that's why Sukuna dispels the Shikigami of Mahoraga itself at the beginning of the chapter, because I think he also knows this, and if Gojo kills it, it's also gone for good. So I think that is Sukuna just like being very aware that Gojo can get rid of this in one attack, and then also knowing that it's kind of his trump card to try and get around Gojo's kit right now. But Gojo here goes on to try and open his domain, with Sukuna saying you can no longer open your domain, and Gojo failing and pouring blood out of his nose, which I've also said there was no way Gege was about to show that nosebleed at the end of a cliffhanger the other day. Have Yuta also be concerned about it and have it not become a factor within this fight. But this is where we get some really juicy information around Sukuna's possible technique here, because we cut over to everyone who was all watching and wondering what just happened with Gojo here, with even Yuta again talking about, did my theory just turn out to be correct? Which again, Yuta might be sweating in all of these chapters, but he is watching and learning, and there are so many points within this fight right now that he has looked upon, learned, and even pointed out stuff that no one else has noticed. So trust me, his moment's coming. So Yuta fans, we are going to be eating good when that happens, trust me. But Sukuna goes on to explain how to use reverse case technique to heal your exhausted innate case technique, and it looks as if you've strained yourself quite a bit. Then going on to say how your case technique is etched into your brain, roughly around the right prefrontal cortex, which is very different from what we've learned before, because previously we learned that case techniques were etched into bodies and not brains, which is why Kenjaku was able to take over bodies and use the body's technique without the original brain being there. But Sukuna completely disputes this. But he then goes on to say how you've been using cased energy to damage your own brain, and then using reverse case technique to refresh your burnt out case technique, where we see Yuta also saying that even using this once is way too risky, which is kind of interesting to me, because I feel as if this implies that Yuta maybe already had pre-existing knowledge on this, but obviously has never even done it because of the risks. But it also goes to show that both Gojo and Sukuna have been playing a very risky game here, with obviously Gojo pointing this out about Sukuna, and now this being confirmed for Gojo and the vice versa. But we cut over to Kusakabe here, who goes on to say how the brain, especially the part of the brain where case techniques are concerned, is a black box. Does that sound familiar to you? Because it should. We saw Sukuna in Shibuya saying the words open, followed by a black box. Now, if what Sukuna says is true and a case technique is stored right there and it's in the brain and it's referred to as a black box, then it looks as if Sukuna might be storing his case technique in the brain in a similar way to Yuta storing his techniques in Rika. I'm going to be making a separate video talking about all the soul stuff and the techniques that we've seen here so far on this little bit of juicy information, because that is a full video in and of itself, and this video is already a juicer as it is. But we see Shoko mentioning how she thought Gojo had gotten used to healing his brain, and this is in reference to Gojo constantly using RCT to keep his brain fresh, so he can have his limitless activated basically around the clock, which is what I said. So pretty much since the Gojo past arc, this dude has been using RCT on his brain almost 24/7 for like 10 years straight now, which is crazy work. But apparently this is just simply too much. Apparently that RCT might be good, but it's not as good as at this level, because this is just really taking the limits to Gojo right now. But we cut over to Sukuna telling Gojo, you've reached a limit that's completely separate from healing your flesh and bones, and supposing you could expand your domain again, you would perish the moment that you did so. Not to mention the fact that you wouldn't be nearly precise enough to oppose me. With Sukuna then going on to activate the wheel again, even now, I want to point out, even now, when he believes he's about to finish off Gojo, he's still taking this precaution in case Gojo has more in the tank. Like, the battle IQ is just off the chart, and this to me, just, I feel like this says like a bit of respect from himself to Gojo. But Sukuna then goes on to say how he'll close his domain this time, and he'll close the barrier, so Gojo will be left with nowhere to run, and then he'll carve him to pieces, and then saying he'll even adapt to that infinity of yours. And then he continues to say that this is goodbye. You were born into an era without being hailed as the strongest, and yet you turned out to be painfully ordinary. And I cannot lie, that is the coldest fucking line that we've seen in a long time right now. Like, that's almost as cold as turn up the volume because this is a funeral for the living. Like, holy fuck, that's so cold. Like, Sukuna might genuinely have some of the coldest lines within the series for sure. Like, just think about when that shit gets animated. That's gonna go nutty. But Sukuna then goes on to activate his own domain, and it crumbles instantly, with everyone watching and is shocked at what just happened. And we get this panel of Sukuna's eyes bleeding, and I'm pretty sure I've said this before and I'll say it again, but seeing his eyes like this makes me cringe. Anything to do with eyes hurts my soul. Like, I was cringing when Gojo's eyes got all cut up when he was caught in Sukuna's domain. But this is where the narrator kicks in and says it hadn't even been 10 seconds since Sukuna took a blow from unlimited void, and yet just like Gojo Satoru, Sukuna's brain sustained enough damage to make domain expansion impossible. But this goes back to what I said earlier with Gojo's domain targeting everything. Even though Sukuna switched the adaptation from himself to Megami, he was still being hit by Unlimited Void because it targets everyone. Bro, Gojo's domain is insane, because this chapter low-key confirms that it will just attack souls, brains, bodies, everything, which is crazy. So my theory about Gojo is kind of paying off right now. I'll keep it a stack with you all. But we get this panel of Gojo laughing and looking feral, saying, looks like it's hitting you pretty damn hard too, with him pointing to Mei's crows and saying, my students are watching. I'm gonna go ahead and just keep showing off, which again is a lovely little callback way back to the first couple of chapters, and we see this panel of everyone looking happy here. And I also want to say, like, there's so many death flags in this chapter. Like, everyone looking happy right now, Gojo getting this little victory, Sukuna monologuing. Like, whenever a villain starts monologuing and explaining their plan, it's just always a bad sign for the villain. Like, it's always bad. Like, it's very rare that shit pays off. So, but there's a lot of death flags going on in this chapter right now for everyone involved. But this chapter ends with Gojo pulling Sukuna in with a blue and punching him in the face, and it's a massive punch. And I've said this before. I said this on Twitter, I said this in the leaks video, and I said this on live streams, but I feel like this punch should have been a black flash in my eyes. Having Gojo come out of the other side of this, and even saying, I'm gonna go show off now, and having him land a black flash right after that would have been perfect in my humble opinion. And yet I know it doesn't really fit the criteria of black flash, but I always just think of that previous statement of the sparks of black don't choose who they bless. So yeah, I feel like it would have been a really good moment for the heroes, like morale, to see Gojo struggling and then landing a black flash like this. It would have been massive for the series as far as I'm concerned. But that panel also brings back a reference to what Yoruzu said after her fight with Sukuna, and that was that loneliness comes with unrivaled strength, and that I will be the one to teach you about what love is. But it cuts off here, and I'm starting to think that that actually meant Gojo here, which is why I said Broken Ronan's video actually makes a lot of sense, even more so now after this chapter. But we also get an author comment here that says, never yield. The decisive battle of the strongest heads to round 2. Meaning we got a lot more of Gojo vs Sukuna in the tank here for sure. And I think in the coming chapters is where we will see Sukuna start to show off that block box that we've all been waiting for here. And I'm very, very excited for it. But that is everything from me. I hope you enjoyed this video. There was a lot to break down here, and I'm pretty sure this is actually my longest review video to date. So if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe, because it would be pretty sick if we got to 14,000 subscribers from this video. That'd be kind of cool. And let me know what you thought in the comments down below. But as always, that is everything from me. Much love. I will catch you guys all in the next one. Much love. Big kisses. Peace.